old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Jedi Master UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Welcome.
Welcome. Hello there.
Hello there. Now we've gone through all of Ahsoka, and we talked a bit on the last episode. Wherefore go we here from? And yes, that's Jedi for let's do Andor next, fellas. So we're talking episode 1 of Andor today, and my fellow Jedi Masters have traversed this quadrant of the galaxy before. I'm coming at it fresh. This is a first-time ride for me, so to any fans out there watching, if this is your first time watching Andor and you're riding with us, I'm right there in the trenches with you. If you're revisiting Andor and you're looking to just dig into something non-Jedi, here we go again. Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther are your compatriots through this journey. And as always, we have some very special background to get us kicked off with. So, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, I cede the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Master. Thank you, Master Uther. And thanks to all of you, Padawans and Sith, both here, abroad, and in galaxies far, far away. So we've spent time, if you're a fan of the Graying Jedi, talking about the future of Star Wars. Where does it go from here? Having just completed their most recent offering, Ahsoka, and we felt that the franchise had opened the door to many tantalizing possibilities under the stewardship of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. So let's make no mistake at this juncture, the future of Star Wars and the direction you would cast your eye towards shows like The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, some of the upcoming titles yet to be released like Skeleton Crew, and the big screen, where we'll see a resurgent Rey and possibly a big Avengers-style Mandoverse feature in the not too distant future. But Andor, it's an off-ramp, but it's not an off-ramp that leads to nowhere. It's a show that you definitely don't want to sit the 6-year-olds down and say, here kids, let's watch Andor, because it really truly is not crafted for the traditional Star Wars audience of young open minds, families, and aging fanboys from here to the Mutara Nebula. It was created by Tony Gilroy. He is the showrunner. He is also the screenwriter for several of these first season episodes, including the first 3 that we're going to be talking about today, being episode 1. And the show was designed like Lincoln Logs or Lego blocks. It's designed so that every 3 episodes or so, the same directors and writers will work on it together to create sort of a mini story. And then the next 3 episodes and the next 3 episodes and so on. So in season 1 of Andor, we have 12 episodes total. And there are 4 distinct story arcs that play out over the course of its first season. Now, they had already announced before this show aired on September 21st, 2022, was its premiere. They had already announced that there would be a second season, which would take us literally to the moment when Rogue One, a Star Wars story, begins. Now, that's interesting because Tony Gilroy was hired by Lucasfilm to save Rogue One, a Star Wars story, way back in the summer of 2016. Rogue One had a release date. They had a movie directed by Gareth Edwards. They had performances and special effects and the whole thing. And apparently the powers that be were very unhappy what was turned in. So they hired Tony Gilroy, an accomplished screenwriter. We'll get to that in a second on his credits. They hired him to help fix the picture that had already been made, perhaps with some quick scenes and rewrites to try and better maintain the flow of the story. Well, his rewrites were significant enough that he ended up receiving a screenplay credit on Rogue One. And when it came time to shoot those rewrites, they basically sidelined the actual director, Gareth Edwards, who is credited with Rogue One, and Tony Gilroy became the director of these reshoots. And again, this wasn't just, all right, let's do a quick pickup shot of Jyn Erso in the... This was soup to nuts. I have a quote, actually, from Mr. Gilroy, which he gave to The Hollywood Reporter a couple of years after Rogue One was released in theaters. By the way, Rogue One made over $1 billion worldwide. So it was a successful picture, and when we do the movies and we talk about it, we'll talk about how it played out. But a lot of what you saw on screen was the result of Tony Gilroy stepping in to, quote, save the picture. And this was his quote back then concerning Rogue One and Star Wars in general. "I've never been interested in Star Wars, ever. So I had no reverence for it whatsoever. I was unafraid about that. They were in so much terrible, terrible trouble that all you could do was improve their position." And that's basically how he approached it. So you have a man whose credits go all the way back to 1992 as a screenwriter. He wrote The Cutting Edge, one of the best pairs figure skating movies you might ever see, with a Twin Peaks star, Moira Kelly, in it. He adapted Stephen King's Dolores Claiborne. He did a fantastically underrated, over-the-top Keanu Reeves, Al Pacino movie, The Devil's Advocate. See it and you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He wrote and directed Michael Clayton with George Clooney. Just a spectacular piece of work there. And he is primarily known for his contributions to the first 4 Bourne Identity movies: The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, The Bourne Ultimatum, and The Bourne Legacy. Now, people, when they cast their minds back 20 years to Matt Damon beating people up to a techno soundtrack, that's what their first impulse is to remember the Bourne movies. Oh, it's just a bunch of martial arts action, Matt Damon looking tough. But if you were to go back and revisit those pictures, you'd find that there was a lot of dense espionage, dialogue, and subplots about Treadstone and the government and secret this and agenda that. And it's just as entertaining, if not more, than the fisticuffs and flying through Moroccan windows. And that's Tony Gilroy. And so basically what we have here with Andor, ladies and gentlemen, is we have an espionage show. A show that unfolds like a novel. And unlike any other traditional Star Wars outlet, this show demands that you listen to the dialogue. The pleasure of this show is hearing these actors, these terrific actors, saying these very literary, very foregrounded lines. It's artificial because you're aware that it's very well written and you're hearing it. It's kind of like watching an Aaron Sorkin television show or movie, or early David Mamet before he got weird, or the Coen brothers before they got lazy. Like, go back and watch Miller's Crossing, which is just a stupendous, I believe, almost a near perfect gangster movie. And again, 75% of the thrill of that picture is the period dialogue and the witty one-liners and back and forth. And that's what Tony Gilroy brings. So when we're watching Andor, this first season and presumably the season still to come, it's not so much a show that you have to take in visually, which you can, but it's a show to listen to, because there are some just fantastic conversations and moments exchanged. It's not just straight plot exposition. It's not just, oh, let me tell you about my backstory. I mean, this is adult stuff. And that's truly what we need to define Andor as. It's an adult Star Wars. But that doesn't mean, oh, we get R-rated lightsaber fights and Twi'leks doffing, their clothing. It's adult because it's about adult themes. He's been on the record as saying this show is about radicalization. How does Cassian Andor, who when we first meet him is a con man, he's a loner, he's a liar, he's shifty, he's untrustworthy, he's burned every relationship that he's had, and anyone that still talks to him is like just one nerve away from saying, get out of my life. His ex-girlfriend, his friends who work in the mines, he's not a great character. I mean, in the sense that you probably don't want to spend your time at the cantina with him, and we'll discuss that. But how does he become the rebel captain and leader that we see in Rogue One? How do we get to that journey? How do you become committed to a cause? And at the same breath, because we know he fights on the side of the angels and the rebellion, so we're inclined to root for him and his eventual conversion, at the same time, the steps of radicalization can also be put on the side of the bureaucracy, the empire. And so it's actually his transformation there's a flip side to it, like everything, light and dark, Jedi and Sith, etc. There's a flip side to it that's just as equally damaging. And if Cassian Andor had grown up in the Imperial system, that same conversion could have led to terrifying results, etc., etc. So like I said, this is a show when you turn it off, your brain is actually spinning, a la perhaps a really well-written episode of Star Trek. This is Star Trek Deep Space Nine to Star Trek The Next Generation back in the early 90s, in the sense that Star Trek The Next Generation was what the traditional boundaries and lane the Star Trek franchise was poised to go, whereas Deep Space Nine presented an alternative, something grittier, something audiences had to adjust to and embrace, moving forward, and in which characters could have moral, shades, and not be just simply drawn black and white archetypes. I mean, let's take how we meet Cassian Andor, played by the remarkable Diego Luna, whose credits you will remember him from Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights. I know you do. The Terminal, Steven Spielberg's Tom Hanks stuck in an airport romantic drama comedy. And he had a supporting role in Sean Penn's Milk a few years ago. You've seen Diego Luna. You've loved Diego Luna. He was Cassian Andor in Rogue One. But in Rogue One, he was more of an archetype, a stoic rebel captain on a mission and must complete the mission at no cost, at any cost. And so we didn't really get a sense. We just expected him. He's a good guy. And here it says, no, he wasn't always a good guy. And in fact, he was kind of a bad guy who had to make that evolution. And how did he go on that journey? And what triggered that? And that's the journey that we're going to be exploring here. But when we meet him, he's in the red light district on a corporate world, checking out, I'm not sure it's Star Wars' official first brothel, but it's certainly one that's featured very prominently, albeit chastely. There's no on-screen Twi'lek nudity again. And he's looking for a sister that was last seen on the planet Kenari when they were just children years ago. He doesn't find the sister, but he does find trouble as two intoxicated, overprivileged corporate cops start to hassle him. And the situation gets ugly quickly. And again, like that first thrill down your spine of either revulsion, admiration, or shock is, they get into a scrap. One of the cops is killed incidentally within the combat. Again, the cop overstating his privilege and authority and so forth. And then Cassian has to make a choice, and it's a choice we've seen him make in Rogue One where I have to protect my own skin and my own neck. And he shoots the guy with a blaster, point blank in the head, and then makes his escape. I mean, it's murder. I mean, it's premeditated murder. And that's a big lift for your protagonist, for your main character. And I think that's where I want to start the discussion before we get further into this show. I mean, we know where Cassian ended up, so we are inclined to root for him. But that ruthlessness, even at the expense of survival, like I say, that is fascinating. I mean, I don't think George Lucas would have had Obi-Wan Kenobi or Luke Skywalker. I mean, he had Han shoot Greedo. We know Han shot
No,
first.
he didn't.
Okay.
He changed it.
Okay, fine. That's another argument.
Which I was going to bring that up, and now you stole my thought.
Well, you can have it. You can have it in a
Just
second.
keep
But
going. No.
the ruthlessness is a fascinating thing. And I don't want you to judge his journey until we reach the end. So you don't want to make big sweeping statements. But tell me that didn't take you aback, new viewers, or the first time you saw it, where it was just like, all right, this is how I'm getting out of this situation. I'm going to commit a homicide, basically. And then I'm going to try to cover it up, because obviously I know I'm guilty. And I'm going to drag my remaining friends and relatives into my complicity, because I'm only interested in saving my own neck. I don't care about the galaxy. I don't care about morals and ambition or anything else. I just need to save my own neck. And that's a bold choice to start a Star Wars series. So I throw it out to you guys, you know, your very first taste of Cassian as Tony Gilroy has presented him.
I like it. As a first-time viewer, I liked everything about that opening sequence. I go back to the things I talk about on Strange New Worlds all the time over at the Warp Core podcast. The amount of acting that takes place on the actor's face in that sequence when they're fighting in that back street. You know, you get this moral struggle in seconds and milliseconds that plays out on his face, and he's actively making this decision where he's got an easy out. All he has to do is agree to this guy's story that he's spinning. Perfect con, get away with it. Obviously opts to take the probably safer route in the long run. And then on the flip side to that, if it's not for this young, ambitious constable, they were going to let him get away with it too. And that's like you said, this is a very adult Star Wars. This is very much a real life reflection of life in the Empire. And certainly like the corporate power hierarchy that you would expect, you know, on this type of a level. And I love the speech that the elder statesman or elder employee gives to this young constable, like, look, short and sweet, don't draw attention, it's not worth our time, it's going to make everybody's lives a hell of a lot easier. I'm like, if that isn't like corporate cover-up 101.
It's a fantastic conversation, yes.
Yeah, he completely accurately calls what just happened. He's like, I know exactly what happened here. It's not worth our time opening that can of worms. It's a one-off situation. It's probably the person who did it is probably never going to show their head again because they're not stupid. Otherwise, we would have caught him by now. Boom, done. Like, you know, and that's just it's real life, and that's the scary part. Like, everybody kind of wants to believe that the good stuff, the sunshine and rainbows, is real life. That's real life right there. You make the tough decisions, and that's kind of the amazing part of this. Is for a Star Wars movie, this is the first one that, or I should say, for a Star Wars series or movie, this is the first one that actually feels pretty damn real. Like right out of the gate, it's very human. It's very much rooted in, you know, the baser elements of all life, right? You know, we're all making moral quandaries all the time. And we have to make those hard judgments, whether to benefit ourselves or others. Most people are self-interested. This is how it's going to play out in this case. And that's the picture not a lot of people want to see. So I think, frankly, when you know, because Rogue One came out first, of course, when you know where this ends up, you almost have to tell it from this point of view. Like, this is almost where it had to start to really bring that character some depth. You know, otherwise it'd be awfully two-dimensional if he was just like morally, you know, a Jedi. There has to be some dubious there. Otherwise, you're just retelling another Jedi story, which this is clearly not.
But that's that's my argument about Han Solo. That's what makes Han shooting first, and we've had this discussion before. But Han shooting first gives him the depth that I think was needed, because him and Cassian are kind of in the same boat. Mm-hmm. They were out for themselves. Leia even says it. Like, you care about no one but yourself, pretty much, right? In that little speech that she has. And then he shows up and saves the day because he whether he sees the moral side in it or he has a change of heart, you know, that scoundrel, you know, really has a heart down, you know, inside of him somewhere. It's the same thing with Cassian. You know, he spoiler alert, obviously, at some point, because we know what happens in Rogue One, he comes around. But to have it start out like that, to me, it's very parallel to Han Solo, which is why him shooting first makes a difference. Like, it had to be like that. And turning it around the other way, which I know it's a conversation probably for another podcast, but it's important that he shoots first. That makes the Han Solo character. Right. When it comes to go ahead. Did you want to jump in there, Psyllium?
No. Keep going with Cassian, because I have a nice off-ramp of our own here, but go on.
Okay. I also think it's kind of funny that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this group that's kind of going after him, like they're hired help. Like the Empire hired a security service. Was I imagining things there?
Okay, so in the grand canon thing of, there was always a, quote, corporate sector, this bureaucracy, who the Empire, you know, much like Lando Calrissian's Savannah gas operations in Cloud City on Bespin, they sort of, as long as you make sure that the kickbacks and the grift come, you're kind of left to your own devices. And we'll see in further episodes of this season when the Empire decides that arrangement is over. But, I mean, and that was part of my jumping off point. It was that it's sort of the banality of evil. Like, we don't have Jedi, and we don't have Sith, and we don't have Palpatine plotting the, you know, destruction of the Senate and the galaxy. This is a blue-collar, ground-level show, again, from both sides of the coin. The citizens of the Republic, you know, who are just trying to, you know, in a post-Clone Wars environment, just trying to make a paycheck, have a drink, go home to the missus, you know, keep your head down, don't get involved. And we didn't really touch on it so much with the Empire here. We will, but we did it with the corporate side. I mean, have you guys ever worked with somebody like Cyril Karn? I mean, the young, eager-to-please constable who tailors his own uniform, won't take no for an answer. His co-workers hate him because he'll write them up for eating at their councils when they're, like, supposed to be investigating. Come on. Like, I know you've met that person before, or you've heard stories about that person before. Like, oh yeah, the man, I'm going to play by the rules, and I'm going to get recognition for that. And, I mean, you talk about acting on his face. He's stunned when his superior, again, just casually says, look, you know, let's take the path of least resistance here. You know, I'm off to a conference. I have to report the crime figures. I'm not going to report we have an unsolved murder. Like, just, you know. And he's like, you can just see, like, his soul is, like, crushed. Like, I can't believe it. I thought you would, you know, applaud me for my ingenuity and you know.
Right. It's the try-hard making a name for himself. Right. And using the idea that there's some kind of justice that he's really going for, where all he wants is a promotion and to run the show. Right. I mean, that's
with a very punchable face. That actor, right. Kyle Soller, like, you just first time you see him, you know almost what you think you need to know about him, and we'll learn more about Cyril as we go on as well. That's the great thing about this show, is that first impressions are not necessarily the total complete package, and even somebody that you think you've got pegged, like Cyril, is going to show us things down the road that you're going to be like, oh my gosh, what? But I just love the idea that the Empire could be more than TIE fighters strafing a planet. It could just be, filing reports and just, looking at the clock. Like my shift's over.
Well, that was the idea for one of the shows they were going to do. I can't remember which one it was, but it was going to be below the cloud level of Coruscant.
Yes.
Where like all the dirty deeds are going on in a sense, and the people are grinding it out. Yeah, and this show definitely kind of has that feel of, like you said, the guy just sitting at the monitor, seeing all these different reports come in and being like, whatever, okay, what, you know what I mean? Like,
trace
doing
that.
the menial task.
Right. He's like, trace that. He's like, well, do you know what you have to do to trace, And he's like, well, I'll find
I don't want to do that. I just want to. I want to punch out at 5 o'clock. I mean, I don't have time for that. Which just leads me to one more thing, which I think is interesting, because we're seeing it in Ahsoka and in Mandalorian. It seems like the Empire is going through what the New Republic is going through. What we're seeing in Mando and Ahsoka, where it's just it's barely holding together by threads here and there in a sense, because it's almost too much to govern. It's almost too much to take care of. The Empire's trying to keep everything together, under the guise of, I'm going to hurt you if you don't do what I say. And the New Republic's trying to do it under the guise of, we're going to treat you right and everything's going to be fine. We're the good guys. And I just see, again, a little bit of this parallel that it's going to fall apart for the Empire. We know it's going to fall apart again from the New Republic, which goes back to our whole discussion of breaking the cycle at some point. That needs to be done, and hopefully we're going to see that in some future Star Wars stuff. And one more thing, because I can't help myself, and it's the way it is. Seeing, and I can't remember if this episode or the second one, because I watched both of them, because I thought we were going to talk about both of them tonight, but seeing Cassian when he was younger on that planet makes me feel pretty good about Skeleton Crew, because I feel like I'm getting a little bit of a preview of that in terms of, like young kids on their own trying to make their way in Star Wars.
It was
getting a little bit of that too.
I thought that was a fascinating choice to not give us any subtitles. I mean, what is the obvious impulse? Yeah. Like an alien language, you have to like spell out what they're doing. At no point in that sequence on Kenari, which had traces of the Lost Boys from Peter Pan and Thunderdome and everything else, at no point were you not conscious of what was going on, what they were telling each other, who was in charge, but I thought it was a great choice, because Star Wars has done this, and that's how I learned to read, for goodness sake, was Greedo's subtitles, like in the original Star Wars. Probably not how I learned to read, but I certainly got a head start. But they very easily could have just said, because he's referred to as Cassa, which is the name of this episode, by his little sister that he ends up looking for at the brothel. She's like, Cassa, and then she'll say something, and she's saying, Cassa, I want to go with you. No, you stay here and at the camp where it's safe. But they don't spell it out, right? They're talking in their alien tongue, and we just, because we're smart people, like we go, okay, I get it. I don't need to be spoon-fed that. It's just like I say. It's a show, you can tell after hearing Tony Gilroy's quote that he's interested in people. And he's interested in the emotional choices that they make and how they play off of one another. He's more interested in that than the hardware. There's no room for a Jedi or a Force-sensitive user, even though there was in Rogue One. That's not what holds his interest. He wants to show you, again, the straight, blue-collar side of things. And no one better personifies that than the very attractive Bix Colleen, played by Adria Arjona, whose most notable credit was the dreadful Jared Leto Morbius. She played the female lead in that a couple of years ago. Liked her much better in this one. But again, right away, it's the ex-girlfriend, right? Or it's they have a history. And now she's in a committed relationship with her boss, which is a whole different kettle of fish. And when Cassian comes to her and says, I've got a piece of Imperial tech, I've got a Starpath unit, a navigation device that Imperials use to make their way through the galaxy, it might be worth something to the black market, to the, you know, the underworld, the denizens you were referring to. And, you know, she's pissed that he won't sell it to her so that she can make a buck. And he's, you know, I love his line to her, let's not get emotional. You know, a very sort of like Casablanca, like, you know, hey, this is business. This isn't personal. I need your help to get your buyer on the hook for this thing I've been holding out on you. I didn't tell you about it. Because she's pissed off. There's so many quotable lines throughout the series, and, you know, again, we've already talked about a couple of them. When he's trying to convince his friend to give him an alibi for the murders, and he talks him through this whole scenario where they got drunk together at the guy's house, and he's like, no. His friend eventually plays along and says, no, that's not what happened. You insulted my choice of beverage, and I let you know about it, hence the bruising on your face. And then you came here this morning to apologize to me, which is what everybody, all the other witnesses are seeing. It's just fantastic. I mean, like I say, it's somebody who understands grown-ups and writes how grown-ups behave towards one another. And that's not to say that The Mandalorian and Ahsoka are, quote, dumbing down, because I don't believe that's the case. But like I say, Tony Gilroy is not telling us, like, what we would traditionally back as a Star Wars story. Like I said, he does not care about Star Destroyers and, you know, all of that. And he was that was kind of forced on him in Rogue One because that was the story they were telling. So in a sense, he had to play in that sandbox because that's what you needed to tell that story. But given his own devices, when Kathleen Kennedy came to him, the president of Lucasfilm, and said, do you want to do more in the Star Wars universe? This was what he wanted to do, a prequel to a prequel. And because he thought, there's just a lot of, you can strip mine a lot in there. There's a lot more beneath the surface of these people. You know, you'll have people in the Rebel Alliance who don't always act in the interests of good. And you'll have Imperials, or, you know, would-be Imperials like Cyril Karn, whom you might feel sorry for, just because he is sort of this pathetic cog in this bureaucratic machine. I mean, like I said, right now you just want to, you know, put a stapler in a Jell-O mold. But, I mean, like I said, I'm excited, as you can tell, to go on this journey because it's a journey of the human condition. And so much when we draw contrast between Star Trek and Star Wars, we say, well, Star Trek's about the people, and Star Wars is about the myth-making, the mythology, all of that. And that's all true. But here's a show that shows us a fascinating what-if. You know, it's not sustainable in the long run. There's not going to be an audience just for this. And some traditional Star Wars fans, believe it or not, they rejected it because it isn't telling those Skywalker tales and intergalactic, you know, good versus evil stuff, you know. It's a show that you have to have patience. I think you guys would agree. It kind of felt like the first chapter of a book. And, you know, we haven't met, you know, we've only met a third of our characters. There's only, you know, two or three characters that have screen time in this one. And as the show progresses, we'll get more. Some will come into the narrative and stay. Some will come in and leave. I mean, it's really, 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 really fun stuff. But like I said, Star Wars has always been what it's been and will continue to be, and we hope successfully and make good decisions and all of that. But boy, when you get the kind of creative people that worked on this show, you know, in addition to Tony Gilroy, and you'll see some other big names in there as we go. I mean, big names in the sense that their credits are heavy hitters. Like, it's great. It's like the long-rumored, never came to fruition Quentin Tarantino Star Trek picture that they taught. Like, when you see somebody, a different voice...
Love to see that script.
Giving, yes. When you hear a different voice, giving voice to an established universe, I think any Star Wars fan and any graying Jedi fan, worth their salt. This is a real ride, folks. This is really exciting. That's right. So, I mean, if any show deserves comments, these episodes that we're going to be taking you on here with Cassian Andor and Cyril Karn and Bix Caleen. I love that name. That's one of the most perfect Star Wars names I've heard in a long time. Bix Caleen. This is heady stuff. And like I say, I'd like to hear more from UrzaMaster because, again, he's just coming into this like a babe, freshly swaddled. Like, it's all new to him.
And there's really nothing better than a freshly swaddled babe.
Yes.
I've done it 3 times, and I can tell you that that first snooze they take and that brand new swaddle, you're like, and I will say that was the feeling I got watching after, of course, the opening sequence, which really grabs you. The feeling I got watching is I kind of nestled in. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable in this universe. And this is unfolding like I'm watching an episode of CSI or Law and Order set in the Star Wars universe. It's certainly heavier subjects. It's more dialogue. It's the Shakespeare of the Star Wars universe. It's really taking you through a journey through words that I don't think sci-fi fans are necessarily ready for. And I think that's why it maybe got some mixed reviews up front, because it is geared more towards higher level thinking. You know, I mean, to put it bluntly, I think people want the instant gratification of episode 8 or an episode 9. You know, they want to see porgs and green milk and goofy situations where Luke Skywalker's screaming about books to a Yoda ghost who's like, "Don't worry about it." It's silly. You know, I mean, they don't want the heavy, you have to think, you have to feel your way through this. Which, if you go back to the core trio that started Star Wars, the first movie really was very dialogue driven up until a certain point. And for me, for my part in it, the movie got a lot less interesting after the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi. After that point, it's not as exciting because it's no longer world building. You're starting to have to get thrown into things, and you are Luke Skywalker, essentially. You're learning the Force as you go, and there's just leaps and bounds you just have to take for granted in between the movies. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not attacking, you know, the Golden Trilogy, but there are flaws with it, where like you get that like mystic acceptance. You have to suspend disbelief because you have to enjoy the story, and that's where I could see critics of Star Wars, you know, or people who just never got into it going, well, it's so unbelievable. And I think up until Obi-Wan faces off with Darth Vader and disappears, up until that point, you know, you're really building out a story that's fairly believable. And then all of a sudden you get into this sort of mystic transition where, you know, stuff doesn't quite add up.
You don't feel like... sorry, I'm going to interrupt your thing here,
No,
because I got to ask this question because it just kind of... I agree with you. Here's my question. Do you feel that... You don't feel that in Empire Strikes Back, when he was on Dagobah with Yoda, that we got some of that back? Because... Or do you feel... I can see what you're saying, though. So let me just finish this with... I could see what you're saying about experiencing it through Luke, because it is kind of a choose-your-own-adventure with Luke Skywalker. I do like how... Because that's kind of how I feel how you kind of described it, and I do like that. But do you feel like we got... Because with Ben Kenobi, I'm sorry, this question's going way longer than I thought it was. With Ben Kenobi, we were getting the mysticism, right? Like we've talked about that a lot. That's the thing that we love is the magical mysticism, which I think Ahsoka brought. Which by the way, a lot of you haters out there online that didn't like Ahsoka, you're missing it. You're missing the mysticism and the magic that's coming back with it, quite frankly. Yeah. So you should click subscribe down below so you can get more of this information and this knowledge, and you can kind of come back to the Force. But anyway,
you can believe him because he's bald.
See? With that, do you think we were getting some of that on Dagobah with Yoda in terms of learning?
Yeah, and I think, and that's the beauty of the first 3 films too, is that you get a little bit of both. You get Indiana Jones on Solo, and you get the melodrama adventure story, the saving the princess, you know, Super Mario Brothers, if you will, which is a great flick, by the way, with John Leguizamo.
Okay.
But you also get, you know, if you watch all 3 movies together. Now the thing is, they came out not at the same time, so we have the luxury of being able to experience it all at once. But each movie has its own little package of building blocks, and they kind of put the story together for you. And yeah, you get the Dagobah system in Empire Strikes Back, and that's the reason why that movie's the best in the original trilogy, is because it's tying up two ends, right? Because you get a lot of the action, the convenience, the Deus Ex Machina in Episode 6 with the Ewoks, and you get sort of the action adventure of the first film, which you almost had to tell a good story. Like, to have a good movie, you have to have action adventure. Like, I might be the only person on earth that sits down and watches Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet and goes, I love every second of this. It's a word-for-word recreation of a very long play with no breaks other than to change the DVD or the VHS tape, which I think the VHS version you might have to change twice. So, yeah, it's dry. Like, you have to be of a certain variety. But the cool thing about Star Wars, especially in Empire, is that it does have that hyper-realistic or mystic sort of storytelling that, your Mistress of Spices has. It takes the real world that it's giving you, even though it's a sci-fi world, but it builds it out with this sort of identifiable, higher power, which most humans can understand in some way, shape, or form. Obviously it's a religious parallel, so that is pretty interesting. But that's kind of the beauty of Andor, is like, this is also the real world. Like, this is your welcome to the real world jackass moment. Like, believe it or not, the world's kind of crappy, and most people are kind of crappy. And even if they're just punching a clock, working their 9 to 5, they might help cover up a murder. His friend has no idea what he's covering up. He thinks maybe he got into a little, rough up at a bar, and it's like, oh, all right. Or, like getting in trouble with the old lady. Like, oh man, I need you to cover for me. I was out late last night drinking. I wasn't supposed to do that. Oh yeah, I got you. You're like, oh man, I do this all the time. You gotta stop doing that, blah, blah, blah. This is real life. That's not great real life, but it's very real. Like, this is something that adults get. It's not watching an episode of Cheers or Frasier, but it's taking a very familiar universe and saying, hey, believe it or not, while the poorly aimed, white Schutzstaffel are shooting at these 3 kids running through this giant Death Star, while that's all going on, there's dudes out here, like, pulling the real heavy stuff around, moving boxes and loading trucks. That's... it almost makes Star Wars, like, better to me in a way. And that's where, like, a Deep Space Nine, which I think is a perfect corollary for this, is, like, compelling, because you get, like, the skeezy bar owner who's got a heart of gold but would never let you know it because he's always trying to make a buck. Or you got the, overbearing constable who actually just wants to be, fit in. And then you've got the super spy who's just this unassuming tailor who definitely is trying to not just play mind games, but probably other types of games with the doctor. And I mean, it's layers upon layers upon layers of human interaction or alien interaction that tells a compelling story. And that's something I've always kind of wanted from Star Trek. In the same vein that we've always wanted that dark Darth Vader, the one that goes out and commits these atrocities. We want to see that villain really get built. But in a way, would it not maybe ruin the character? And that's where I'm hesitant to really get behind Andor at this point. Is like, is this going to make me like Andor less as I go? As a fresh viewer, I'm coming at this going, woo, goodness. Like, this guy's a little dirty. But there again, I think back to all my favorite dramatic movies where even the heart of gold type people, if they're representing real people, they do some wackadoodle kind of stuff. I mean, I look at one of my favorite flicks, right? Legends of the Fall. Excellent movie. The heart of gold character signs up for war to fight for Canada and just leaves his brand new wife behind. Like, see you. And goes and gets killed. Like, you moron. But his brother goes with him, and then his 2 brothers are both trying to bang his ex-wife, or his widow. Like, oh, jeez. It's wild. But that's real life, especially in that era when you lived in Montana, just three boys and their dad, like slim pickings. One of them brings a pretty girl around. That kind of stuff happened, and probably not as nice and romantic as it showed in the movie. Andor in the same way is showing us, like, how do you make a rebel? I mean, really, how? Most people don't sign up to be freedom fighters. You're not typically born into that. You're made into it through circumstance and life experience. And I think we see that play out, unfortunately, on the world stage all too often, in sometimes horrifically negative ways. So I think this is really, honestly, kind of timely to be talking Andor.
Good point.
The conversation, the two conversations, because Andor at his heart is a BSer, and I would say what that stands for, but this is a family podcast, so no profanity here. But he likes to just coast by when guys are saying you owe us money, like he's just glib, like, oh, it's already in play. I can't get you your money back until
Han Solo.
Right, another scoundrel, like, and he thinks that his charm
10%.
He thinks it will work with Bix, and she sees through his BS. But the two conversations, they're sort of like mirror images of each other. He gets his friend, his mining friend, on this wonderful junk world, Ferrex. Just, again, you feel like you've never been there physically, but you feel like you know what's around each corner. Like the layout, the costumes, the cinematography, like it feels very lived in and it doesn't feel like a set. And Andor, Tony Gilroy did not want to use the digital accoutrements that the Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka have with the giant stagecraft screens of LED backgrounds and things that they, little tricks to convince you're on alien worlds. This was all shot on location in England and on, sound stages, obviously, for the interiors. But they built Ferrex, that village. Like, they constructed it. And they filled it with people, not CGI extras or what have you, and so forth. So, and the alien costumes for the most part are like they're latex and old school, New Hope.
Love real effects like that.
Right. I mean, and it feels it. I mean, it has a cute droid, even B2EMO.
I was gonna bring that up.
Yeah, the little, like a faithful puppy, like very, very articulate, but just like you look at it and your heart breaks. You're like, oh, you're just this little like vacuum.
It was such a sweet little guy. Such a sweet little guy.
Right, and you're just praying like nothing bad happens to it. Like, because sometimes droids get the brunt of, you're like, I hope nobody shoots it or kicks it or throws it off a cliff. Like, he's like, Cassian, and then, I need you to tell a lie for me. I need you to say I was, And it's like he's like eager to do it, but it's not part of his programming to sit there and like be deceptive, And he wants to go with him. He's like, why can't I go with you? He's like, no, you go back home. Like, I need you at home. Like, it's perfect. But the two conversations,
it's kind of heartbreaking in a way.
Right.
It's like leaving your puppy at home, and
Right.
that
Stay. Yeah.
I gotta say that kind of like it hits different. I mean, Star Wars always kind of seems to try and pull at that particular heartstring. Whether it's the Gungans or trying some cutesy animal on for size. The little cats from Ahsoka were kind of like that.
Or the Noti.
Where it's like, yeah, you really want you're just trying to tap into something there. And this is like and I'll say this is the first time I think because it felt very real that I was like, oh, poor little guy. Like, I don't think I ever felt like that about R2D2. Because I knew R2D2 was always going to be there. Like, that's. Although that was absolutely the function. Like, George Lucas intended for R2D2 to be that sympathetic kind of. Not just part of the comic relief of R2D2 C3PO, which still, I believe, is one of the most brilliant ideas any filmmaker's ever had. But that was part of it. Like, you should feel a little sympathetic for R2D2. C3PO, you kind of feel like, what a numbnuts.
He deserved it. Yeah.
Like, he's kind of a complain Jane. R2D2 is a little more hardcore. Like, I don't know. I love that. I love that about Star Wars, that those tropes can exist and continue. and still feel fresh. Like, I don't feel like I'm getting a rehash there. This is like BB-8 to me was a rehash of R2-D2. I was very like nonplussed. I don't hate BB-8 though, but I was nonplussed for sure. And I gotta admit, this little rectangle droid, square droid, is kind of like it. Kind of like it.
Awesome. The BS factor of Cassian, it's at the end where he's fixed. He's obviously borrowed the spacecraft from the used car lot, and whoever it is that he's done it for was willing to cut him this favor, and he's like, you can't be here. The boss is in the office. What are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm leaving it better than I found it. I'm just taking out all the traces of where it was. Like you got a brand new. So he's doing it again, inherently selfish reasoning. And the guy's like, all right, well then get out of here and don't come back. And he's like, well, come on, I was going to take it out. No, we're finished. Like the BS stops working, and it's kind of like I say, you kind of see Cassian in that moment as somewhat pathetic. Like it's that in-law that keeps saying, man, I've got a great investment for you. If you I just need $5,000 and a little seed money, and you're going to be. He keeps trying to buttonhole you at Thanksgiving dinner, before the meal comes out, and he's like, hey, I got to talk to you. Come over here. So it's funny. Like I say, he's a guy who thinks he's more charming than he probably really is. And he's on his road to Damascus moment, if you're well versed in the New Testament and the conversion along the road. He's going to become a true believer in essence, and I think we're probably getting his least interesting side in Rogue One, which is where ironically this journey started, because he's already made his choice, and now he's just a sterling paragon of duty, honor. Like there's nothing more you can slice from that onion. But Tony Gilroy said, hey, I can put a lot of layers between this and that, and it's much more interesting if he's kind of a conceited jerk initially, and then let's see if where his humanity comes from. Because like I say, everyone else on that planet that we've met so far is basically like, don't call me, we'll call you. So that's the
9-to-5er.
Right.
So which vision do you like better? Do you like the Filoni fanboy vision that we've talked about a lot? We feel like he's doing it right. He's keeping some cheese out of it. Or do you like the Gilroy, where there's a guy who really doesn't have a Star Wars affiliation? So you got Filoni, who's the Star Wars geek, right? You got Gilroy, who's like, I just want to tell the story. Which one do you prefer? I mean...
Well, like I said, when we talk about the writing in Ahsoka, we're talking about bringing in that mysticism, trying to find a way forward for the mythology and all the things we've learned about Jedi and the Force and all of this. And so we talk, and Master has talked about the economy of words, and how it's very like cut to the chase and very simple, eloquent, poetic even. But like I say, this is like pages and pages of dialogue. Like, when's the last time you said, like, I want to watch a Star Wars project where I literally, I mean, if there's one thing George Lucas has famously been criticized for, and even I as a super fan cannot deny it, it's that sometimes the lines are a bit too on the nose or a bit too, what have you. Like,
from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. I agree to disagree, Mr. Kenobi.
So, I mean, that's... Whether you buy in or not, it's not hard to at least acknowledge that critique is out there. But like I say, from this episode forward through the rest of this season and on to next season, like, part of you is going to want to see how the story turns out, but part of you is going to be like, boy, I hope I get a really cool speech or monologue or back and forth, because I like listening to what this guy is saying. And so... Does that remove you from... I mean, it calls attention to itself, like I say. Aaron Sorkin, he's done some really great TV and features, A Few Good Men. People always love A Few Good Men, and Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. which was based on his stage play. He comes from the theater, which we got his background in. And it's, again, what is A Few Good Men? I mean, it's a courtroom drama, and all courtroom dramas have is that great back and forth, objection, overrule. You can't handle the truth. And that's how Tony Gilroy writes. It's almost like he writes scenes that could fall into a courtroom drama or an interrogation sequence in a police station. Or, I mean, I'm not talking about the context, but it's just more of just you're waiting for that verbal volleying to go from character to character. And when they're saying intelligent things to each other and having intelligent responses, not just, oh, you're an Imperial bad. I mean, like, that whole conversation between him and Bix, like, you could unpeel that for another week in terms of the subtext. Like, he's obviously hurt her. She obviously can't quit him, even though they're not in a relationship right now. And eventually he'll wear her down with his, quote, charm and BS. And I mean, but that doesn't make her, like a weak female character. Like, you can see that she wants to, I'm done with you. Like, I've got a life here in the garage. I've got someone who, is responsible, comes home at night instead of, going out and things like that. I mean, it's just terrific. But it's like Cody said, this could be Boardwalk Empire, Rome, any of those quality
great shows,
right? Billions. It could be any quality cable drama that you've been watching, Mad Men that you've been watching the last decade or so. But it's Star Wars. It's like Star Wars at like peak TV, but and I think Cody's point on DS9, like, we have to remember 30 years from now that's become the norm, right? We've explored the dark side of Star Trek in Discovery and Strange New Worlds and Picard, and but it's very easy to remember back then when it was two competing visions, when it was this darker slice of life, and it was still the Roddenberry-esque original or Next Generation, right? And how the Next Generation was struggling to find its voice between telling the first couple of season stories, then they started introducing the Borg and all of these things and starting to find their way creatively. Like, it's easy to remember that Star Trek fans were not enamored with DS9 initially. Like, they just they kept it sort of at a distance, and it has only enjoyed more success, as the years have passed, as people have come to appreciate it, and that has led to the high quality level of storytelling that you see that we discuss on the Warp Core podcast, which is also part of Pending Rebrand's diverse cycle of programming that you yourself should be subscribing to and enjoying and sharing with all of your loved ones. What makes a fantastic holiday present is exposing new minds, new voices to the magic of Pending Rebrand and all of their delightful shows.
Someone should write some copies.
Ooh, somebody's talking the corporate talk. Ooh.
Drinking the cool.
And I might have to work that Cisco impression in. Baseball. Jake, what are you doing with Nog? Star Wars fans are like, who's Jake? What's a Nog? I want to talk about Hera. Trust me, I want to talk about Hera too. But now comes the time in our first episode examining Andor that we must bestow upon it our lightsabers, which this series notably does not have. But we're still ranking things on a lightsaber scale. So I defer to you, Lord Uther. What color lightsaber do you offer this episode of Andor, the first episode of Andor?
Oh, I'm definitely going. I'm going green here. I mean, there's no doubt. It's the perfect setup. Cassian again is a very complex character, as we've talked about tonight. Diego Luna does an absolutely fantastic job, and I was looking at some of his other credits besides Dirty Dancing 25 or whatever he did. Yeah, we won't talk about that here, but he was in Narcos. He was in Narcos Mexico, and he was fantastic in that too. He's just a great actor. So yeah, I'm gonna go with green lightsaber. I do know what happens the rest of the way here, or the rest of the way out, obviously. this series just does not disappoint. So to all our PR fans, Grain Jedi fan, if you've been a little leery, I highly recommend that you press play. And then you can leave comments down below about how right I was. So let's go to the noob to Andor. Let's go over to UrzaMaster and see what his thoughts are.
I'm going green as well. I went into this. I'd heard the hype that it was brilliant that a show basically did something that didn't involve Jedi, and gave us another side of the Star Wars universe, which I got to admit I was kind of hungry for, especially after 7, 8, 9. I was a little sick of the grandiose vision that they kept trying to rehash. Now that being said, while I give this a green lightsaber, it was not the first episode of Kenobi, which I still feel is unparalleled in the Star Wars universe. I feel like that show entirely, which we will get to at some point in the near future, really just blows pretty much everything else they've ever made out of the water. And I include the original 3 movies in that, frankly. I have high praise for Kenobi. I really enjoy that show. But I really liked what I saw. I liked that it was gritty, it was adult-oriented, without, the cheap way of getting to adult-oriented. There's not, like, gratuitous violence, necessarily, or, gratuitous nudity or something without, pause or concern. It's not a Game of Thrones. It didn't take what Game of Thrones did in their first episode to really hook me and like, what's happening? It was way more like, oh, this is really intriguing. So this guy's the guy from Rogue One? Tell me more. And that, honestly, because to be quite frank with you, when I first watched Rogue One, if you asked me about Cassian, I would have been like, who? All I remember is Forrest Whitaker. I'm like, what do you mean, Cassian? What about the last King of Scotland who had a breathing problem and wore a CPAP? Like, yeah, I loved Rogue One. Like, I saw it in the theater, I think, twice, actually. Brilliant film, by the way. I can't wait to talk about the movies when we get there. And when we get there, it will be a special time. And the only way to get that for free is hit that subscribe button. All right, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, take us out with your rating.
This week's rating is a green UPS store pen.
Ooh.
So there we have it there. I'm a writer. I make no apologies about that. And I would say that I am professionally jealous of writers who seemingly make it look effortless, but you realize how much work had to go into the written word to be able to craft it. And I mean, I would aspire, like many writers have before, I would aspire to one day be able to deliver something just as intelligent and fun to listen to as, some of Tony Gilroy's work, just like Aaron Sorkin, just like the Coen brothers before they got lazy. This to me is like I say, it's a pleasure to listen to. I don't recommend just closing your eyes and listening to the dialogue because you will miss a lot. But it is a show that you for those of you who don't spend a lot of time paying attention necessarily to what's being said, you just kind of want to know where the story's going. This is the show to sort of train yourself to listen to what they're saying and just how, again, the verbal tennis matches and back and forth, pickleball, I guess is what the kids are calling it now, the back and forth across the net that we're going to be getting, as well as, again, as sort of challenging your own worldview. If you thought that all rebels were pure of heart and all Imperials were hearts of stone, well, this might be the show that at least gives you pause. And the idea of being in a rebellion, it sounds great with the little guys fighting against the authoritarian fascists, but what do you have to sacrifice to make that sacrifice? Like, that's something else that I'm almost certain will come up in the episodes to come. And like I say, if a show can ask you those kind of probing questions, it's usually Star Trek. But so here's a case where Star Wars kind of chose a different lane and I think we're going to attract some very interesting traffic going forward here. So, Green UPS Store Pen, Episode 1, Casa of Star Wars Andor.
Very nice. And with that, we conclude our 8th episode of the Graying Jedi podcast. As we return to our individual Jedi temples, we encourage you to not only hit subscribe, hit like, drop us a comment, but share the wisdom of the Graying Jedi with all your friends, relatives, neighbors, the guy you met at the gas station who was like, "Can you please move? I need to use the restroom." Hey, have you subscribed to Pending Rebrand? Is that a smartphone in your hands? Are you going to be sitting on the toilet? You've got time. I can't wait to see what else is going to happen on Andor. I'm sure you all out there can't wait to see what's going to happen on the Graying Jedi. So we'll just leave you with a very simple, very vigorous Han shot first.